Hey guys, welcome back, episode 31. We're going to talk about ankle mobility today because we've seen quite a few patients recently that have been chasing ankle range of movement into dorsiflexion. They've been chasing this position to improve things like squat mechanics and bottom loading positions from receiving cleans and snatches and things. What we're going to show and what we're going to talk to athletes about is that often those athletes are chasing a range unnecessarily, when problems are much more to do with hip mechanics and rotational torques. So what we're going to talk about now is some of the common tests that are used for assessing ankle range in a functional environment. The two that get talked about mostly is both feet together and going through a squat pattern down to the bottom position and coming back up as one measure of ankle range. The second measure that's talked about quite a bit is a pistol, and we get into position, down into the bottom of the pistol position and back up to the top. And what we find is that people generally talk in terms of if they can achieve those two tasks, they have enough ankle range of movement for functional capacity, and we would generally agree with that. But what we also find is problems on the flip side of that. People who fail to perform pistols correctly or fail in this test often end up chasing ankle range unnecessarily. So what we're going to do is show you how these tests relate to much more a physiotherapy way, if you like, of measuring ankle dorsiflexion. Just to clear up also, we're not talking about calf length purely in this instance. We're talking much more to do with the structures deeper down the soleus through the Achilles tendon structures. Is much more of a limiting factor when your knee is in flexion and not fully extended. So that's a common misconception also, is people do lots of calf stretch and try to achieve this. Doesn't work. So we're going to show now on the wall a simple test that we use in Physio to kind of measure this for you. So we have some tape mapped out on the floor, centimetres measured out quite clearly, and I'm going to measure my knee to wall test on both feet. Being naturally flat-footed, I suffer a little bit with my mechanics, so I have to make sure, and you should too, that when you're doing this test, you're lining up your kneecap with the middle two toes as you're going forward. Do not let the knee drift inside the big toe, because that creates an artificial capacity which doesn't translate to function. So what we're going to do is start off touching the wall, and I can easily touch the wall, not a problem. I would keep walking myself back in increments until a point came where my heel had to lift off the floor to touch the wall. Now I know I can go a lot further, so I'm going to jump over a few steps. Now we're getting to around about 15 centimetres. My knee's in line with my toes. Over I go, and I can just about make it there and touch the wall, and that is about 15 centimetres on my right leg, which is pretty good. My left one, I know is normally around about 10 or 11, and we're going to do that one again. Yeah, just about 12 centimetres on this one, 15 or so on this one. So I have a bit of an asymmetry, and I find that that presents itself sometimes. But we find, generally speaking, that normal range of movement capacity is somewhere above 8 centimetres. And athletes below 8 centimetres, we tend to see with problems. So we're going to start off by saying above 8 is normally a rough guide to where you want to be. But we want to show also how these scales on the floor translate to those two tests. So we're going to do the two tests again, and this time we're going to measure a little bit those tests to show you how it works out. So test number one that's often used is bottom position. Now if I use this as a crude tool and just measure roughly on the floor whereabouts my knee is in line with my toe, I can already tell you that it's far less than the 8 centimetres identified earlier. We're going to do the same with the pistol, so bear with me a second. In bottom position. And we'll show this, I think, from a profile perspective. So bear with me a second, we'll just come around onto the far side so you can see the angle. In position. And back up. So that was a very crude test, forgive me for the wobble, trying to do that as well isn't easy, but we can see we have some numbers now on the floor here, or some lines. Using this measuring device, we can see that on the first test, both feet together test, we had a necessity for about 3 centimetres. On the second test, it was about 7.5 to 8 centimeters. So we think normal range of movement's around about 8. So we like the pistol as a guide to dictate what is normal range of movement. And if you can achieve a pistol perfectly, you do probably have enough range of movement. However, if you can't achieve a pistol, you may find that that isn't an ankle range of movement problem. So before you start trying to get ankle range, go to the wall and do the test in this fashion. Because 7.5 centimeters for me is actually 50% of my current ankle capacity to achieve a pistol, which obviously means if I'm just chasing the pistol's ranges, I'm probably going to be wasting my time a little bit. Conversely, those athletes who can't achieve a pistol, there are many more confounding factors to why that's probably possible. Trunk position, orientation, hip rotation and position and strength and control, all factors that might be meaning you're failing your pistol and not because of ankle range of movement. So it's really important you cross-reference it with this one because you may be chasing ankle range unnecessarily, hammering those ankle corners where you don't really need it. The only other thing to talk about is that we often see people talking a little bit about the functionality of the pistol. We do agree that it relates to function very well, and if you can pistol, you can probably do most things functionally on your feet perfectly. But it's for those guys who can't do pistols, just make sure you're not chasing the wrong thing. Cheers, guys.